Okay, so as I mentioned earlier today, it's like drinking from a fire hose, this course. So we are rolling directly into our next speaker, who I am extremely excited to announce. He's a new faculty member with us at the Leadership Institute, but he's no stranger to us as he has taken an LI course in the past, and I do believe he's going to be touching a little bit upon that as well later. So our next topic that we're talking about is how to work with your local party structure, if you should work with your local party structure, and how to make the most of it if there is one to work with. So our next speaker, his name is Mr. Ken Reid, and he served for 10 years as a council member and county supervisor in Loudoun County here in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Those of us who are local or out here are definitely familiar with that county. That is one of the fastest growing communities in the United States of America due to, of course, the great commodity that is the government here. As a Republican, he won an election in a blue-leading community, Leesburg, never losing elections in 4 tries from 2006 to 2016. He credits his election to the week-long candidate training that he took at LI in 2005. He has also assigned numerous other candidates to win office using the strategies and organization efforts in his new book that we're going to be handing out some magnets about right now. We're really excited to hear from him, to hear a little bit of a sneak peek of the 6 ways that you can win elections. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Anne Marie. I know this will sound trite, but it is an honor to be here because, as Anne Marie noted, the course that I took in 2005, right before Hurricane Katrina, and there were some folks there from Louisiana, some black Republicans who were there to campaign for local offices, was a very good course for me. It really was. And it propelled me into office the following year. And I have to thank the Leadership Institute for all that it's done for me. So, why don't we get started here? First of all, does everybody have my slides?
Not yet. At the end of the class.
At the end of the class. Okay. Well, I do have copies of the slides. And I'm handing out these little funny magnets. I like magnets a lot. It's one of my favorite kind of swag, actually, are magnets. Your key to winning campaigns. Yes, I am promoting something, but not $5,000, $10,000 fees for opposition research. Just a book that costs you to pay just $20, and that's it. And $20 includes consultation with me, especially if you hold the magnet, and I get your picture, and I can put it on my Facebook page, and also my back files. I provide that free for people who buy the book, so you don't have to hire people to do artwork for yard signs, bumper stickers, direct mail. I have a whole bunch of collateral up there online that's available for people who purchase the book. And so I will now dispense with that shameless self-promotion and get to the subject of the day. Now I also have Trump yarmulkes if anybody wants those as well. I got those. If you have any Jewish friends, we'll sell it for $2 also. So if you want to have one for your Jewish friends, so. First of all, how many of you are facing a primary contest or a convention, a nominated contest? Okay, so there are some people here who are facing that. How many of you are facing trying to get just the endorsement for a nonpartisan race as opposed to being nominated? Anybody here facing where you go before your local unit just to get endorsed by the Republican or Democratic parties? No. Okay, so there's nobody. So that way I can dispense with those slides and get you out of here earlier. So let's see, what do I do here? Is that it? Okay, perfect. Anna Marie's already introduced me. Yes, I am an anomaly. I have won elections, including in 2016 when Trump was being swamped in Loudoun County. And I was very much associated with his campaign as the 10th District Chairman for Trump that year. For some reason I ended up the top vote getter of amongst 8 candidates. And so I have won elections. I won for people who have followed my six steps or my 6 secrets have won their elections. But I've also been a delegate to at least 8 county and Virginia state conventions. I recruited delegates for Bob Marshall. That was actually U.S. Senate in 2008. Ken Cuccinelli, 2009, who was actually one of our lecturers here in 2005. Donald Trump in 2016. As I mentioned, I was an alternate delegate in 2016. I've organized the polls in 5 different elections. I currently reside in Norfolk, Virginia, and I hope to be either a delegate or a national delegate to the 2020 convention in Charlotte. Just a caveat here, everything that I'm speaking about here is based on my experience in Virginia. So a lot of what I may be saying may not be applicable to your state parties or local units. So just so you realize that. I think the most important thing to remember about political parties, we're talking about private organizations. They are nonprofit organizations. They're usually, I think, a C6, so they're not tax exempt, so donations are not tax exempt or anything like that. They thrive on donations and volunteers. And a lot of the people I'm sure you're dealing with are volunteers. They're not paid, and so therefore, when you're dealing with volunteers, they do what they want to do. 50 state parties and multitude of county and municipal organizations. There are also various clubs out there, as you know, like the YRs, the CRs, the Log Cabin Republicans, women's clubs, so forth. The party plan, as we call it in Virginia, I don't know if they use that term in your state, pretty much governs the structure. So the units are created by the state party, or they're endowed by the state party, or somehow confirmed, and they have control over the nomination process. So you have to understand that, at least in my experience, your rank and file members and leadership of local units are generally motivated by national issues and ideology. How many of you are running for local office or state office as opposed to Congress? Okay, how many of you are actually running for Congress or helping a congressional campaign? Okay, so there we go. My focus is local, okay, but as Tip O'Neill once said, she was Democratic Speaker of the House back in the 70s and 80s, all politics is local, in my opinion. So there are a lot of local, so your local rank and file are generally motivated more on national issues. I find that a lot of the folks that I've dealt with are not really clued in or keyed into the issues that you're going to be running on when you're facing the general electorate in the fall. Okay, there may be some out there who are, but I find that a lot of these folks are very high level in terms of they don't want to spend money on this, or they do want to spend money on that, or whatever. Okay, so they're motivated by national issues. They're supposed to elect Republicans, and I'm talking primarily about the Republican Party, because that's the party that I'm most familiar with. And that's what I ran as once, and then 3 times nonpartisan, but endorsed once by the Republicans. The other time was a straight nonpartisan. They like passing resolutions. You know, we hereby condemn the Equal Rights Amendment. We hereby condemn abortion. We hereby support President Trump. They love getting into these battles, and sometimes that takes their mind off of the election and your campaigns. So the one thing that I have to leave with you is, and I'll be talking about that later, I won't go into that right away, but understanding their rules and their processes are important. You can't pick your neighbors, you can't pick who you were elected with, you can't pick your mother and father, and you cannot necessarily change your political party to do what you want it to do, which would be to get you elected and forget about everybody else. Unless you have an incredible amount of friends who are members of your local committee, your local unit, who can basically say, we're going to hereby put all of our efforts into whomever's campaign, it's not going to happen. They control the nominating process. And I won't get into the nonpartisan thing, because a lot of these are not doing that. So anyway, how to work with the party to your benefit. I don't know why I'm quoting a Democrat here, Shirley Chisholm, but when I first got interested in politics as a kid, I kind of admired her. She was very charismatic, and she said this: sometimes you have to give a little to get a lot. I guess in political parties, you may have to give a lot to get a little in some cases. You may have to give more than you think. I actually found through the years, if I add it all up, I probably gave more money to the party as a candidate than I got back in donations or support. That's generally what happens that I find. You have to keep your sight on your goal, is to get elected. Okay, remember Moshe, I just came back from Israel, and I'm very Orthodox Jewish, and you got to focus on the promised land. That's me taking this, that's my last oath of office right there, if you didn't know what that was all about. But anyway, and that first picture was me on Fox News with the Trump sign. You could tell it was the only time I was on Fox News. encountered a series of difficult obstacles, okay, but the focus was to get to the promised land. It wasn't sitting there to battle Amalek and Korach and all these other people who were there. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the Republican Party and in the conservative base love getting into ideological discussions, and they want to basically win arguments as opposed to winning elections. And a number of the party leaders, can't stand up to it and say, hold it, let's stop. In Virginia, we had a situation with a congressman who did, he gave, Denver Riggleman, strong Trump supporter. He had 2 gay staffers. He they asked him to do the officiating at their wedding, and he was excoriated by local political units in Virginia, including even the 6th district. Here we are in Virginia, we're basically sinking faster than you can believe. I mean, this state is basically blue now, and we're having people who are really upset over Denver Riggleman for what he did. And I hope that you as candidates will not get into the middle of battles. As it says in Proverbs, don't quarrel with any man or woman without cause, so don't start fights and avoid them. So it's good to be are you all members of your political party? Who is not a member of their local unit? Raise your hand if you have the guts to tell me. Okay, so you're all members, and that's good. I joined my unit 3 years before I ran, and I was involved, so I would work the polls, and I would make phone calls, and I would put up yard signs, and I would give money. So people knew that I was committed. That helped me when I got into office as well, because I had to take certain votes that a lot of people in the party didn't like, and I had to deal with that. But they liked the fact that I was a committed Republican, and I would even come back there and support people who were out opposing my initiatives. So show your face at meetings. Be there on a personable basis. Again, I find a lot of the party activists are high level, okay? So they watch Fox News, they read the conservative press, and they're very much motivated on the national issues. That's what kind of motivates them. They're people who have a side interest in politics. They're not necessarily people who want to run and spend hours at meetings like me. Look at the gray hair that I have after 10 years in office. I have so many stab wounds in my back, but I have a lot of notches on my belt of accomplishments too. So I'm very proud of that. Make donations. Cozy up to donors. Figure out what you got to do, but don't get involved with leadership, please. If you started to get involved with, a faction, for instance, that wants to, like in 2010, I was trying to get my friend Tom Dunn elected, and I mentioned him in the book because he had a great slogan, get the job done. His signs were all over Leesburg. They won him elections over and over, except when he ran for mayor, unfortunately. And there was a contest over who was going to be the chairman of the Loudoun County Republican Committee. I remember going to the mass meeting where there was going to be this election, and there was this fellow there who was very much involved with this whole dispute, and I was saying, I need you for my campaign. Are you going to help me? Are you going to help me? And he goes, well, you don't realize how important this is, Ken. This is so significant. Who's going to be the chairman, blah, 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 blah. And his candidate lost, and she was very good. But the guy who won, even though, he was considered part of some, faction, ended up being a very good chairman. And then in 2011, the following year, all 9 Republicans got elected to office. So, he was so worked up, and so therefore he couldn't even think about helping my campaign. Don't do that. But if you do happen to speak to the base, whether it's your local unit or whatever, give that rousing speech. Don't get into, specific policy discussions about transportation or education, unless there's something that's really burning, like right now in Loudoun County, a big concern over LGBTQ books, okay? And so it's made a lot of national news, and so that's an issue where I think conservatives can be on the right side of things involved in the party. So they exist to nominate candidates and win elections, but their overarching goal, I find, is self-preservation. And it's amazing how they will come after candidates for, hey, you want to buy an ad in this program? Do you want to do this? Filing fees. I mean, I couldn't believe we had a firehouse primary for the 10th district in 2014 in Virginia, and they wanted $7,500 from each of the candidates who filed. This was a firehouse primary. In other words, it was a party-run primary. It was not a state primary. Because in Virginia, we have open primaries. Anybody can vote, Democrat, Republican. Anybody here from Virginia? Oh, got some Virginians here. Well, afterward, they're going to tell you what BS I just said. They're going to tell you that these guys are from Virginia, so they know better than I do. Probably they're going to be saying, well, I get to see the look on their face. So, in my book, I talk about, your previous speaker also mentioned about how, certain volunteers can be a problem. And this is what I used the committee for, is I got volunteers for my first campaign. It was very helpful. They looked at me as a great conservative, blah, 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 so they got involved in my campaign. It was very helpful. I won by 38 votes out of 9 people running. So you had to win in the top 3, so I was the third. I was always the runt of the litter whenever I ran, say, except in 2016, it seems. 2016, I was the top vote getter in Leesburg. And so I talk about talkers, applauders, doers, schmoozers, strategists, and egotists in terms of volunteers. And you're going to find this in your local units, people who love to talk, they love to give ideas, but door knocking, oh my God, I can't do that. Or making phone calls, are you kidding? Oh my God, they're keyboard conservatives, as I call them. They love to post online or on blogs and Facebook and so forth. Love to make sure that certain people are in the party or not, whether you're a rhino or a real Republican in name only, rhino. So that's a bad epithet to call any Republican, almost as bad as an ethnic slur, to be honest with you. So you got to find the doers, the people who are willing to knock the doors and so forth. You can't expect the party members to focus just on your race. There are other races on the ballot. Now, some of them do have paid staff. I mean, there are some state parties that will have people, but I find that they're focused, again, more on the global party's needs, not on specific candidates necessarily. So you have to build your own organization. I'm going to I know this is kind of a strange segue, but again, I just came back from Israel, and Rabbi Hillel, I think, said it best. Pirkei Avot is one of the seminal Jewish texts written in the 1st century. And one great quote I love about a leader is somebody who can turn an enemy into a friend. Isn't that nice? I don't know if Hillel said that, one of the other writers of Pirkei Avot, but what Hillel said was, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And when I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Now that sounds very, very typical Jewish, different ideas, mixed up, and what's he saying there? Well, basically, I think what he's saying is that you have to be out for yourself, even though we expect our candidates to be selfless. It's amazing how the electorate and even the party activists, they want us to sacrifice everything. Our family time, our careers, and I sacrificed my career quite a bit. Family time, kids were raised great. Everything was perfect in that category, but my business went down pretty substantially. So we expect them, but at the same time, you have to be selfish. You can't be, if you've got somebody who says they want to work for you and they're great, but yet they don't have the personality, they don't have the drive, they're just a drag on you, you have to let them go. And that's the same with consultants, it's the same with a printer who's messed you over or something. So it's so strange. I call this the paradox of public service. And even once you're in office, you have to be focused on yourself to a degree, even though you're there to help everyone else. And it's sad that a lot of us put our public life over the needs of God and our families and our businesses and everything. And I hope that doesn't happen to you. So what can you expect from your local party? What they should be doing, I hope I'm not going over time. Am I good?
You're good until 3:30.
Oh, I'm good till 3:30. Well, I'm going to try to speak earlier, so I want to end as soon as possible, so you can have time to ask questions. And buy the book. No, anyway. So, give you a chance at the nomination process. Polls show that, at least the poll that I saw, that actually the number of independents has grown. These people who say they're independent, but when it comes down to it, and they come to the polls, and there's a volunteer there with a Democratic sample ballot and one with a Republican ballot, they're going to make a decision, and they're going to come down on one party or the other. It is still a significant way that people vote, because people don't, even though we're all junkies about news, and I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I love reading, you know, conservative magazines. I went to the Jewish Leadership Conference in New York, and it was just so great to listen to all these great conservatives talk. That's not where the electorate is, and so they make decisions based on personality or whatever you portray in your literature and in your campaign, and of course in your door knocking, which I hope you're going to be doing. So they will man the polls for you. They'll post signs. I'm going to get to low-cost mailing permits, access to lists, and potential help from other candidates on your slate. What they may not help you much with, what I found is I had to help man the polls as a candidate. I mean, if you have a precinct captain or district chair who really doesn't have the motivation skills or a list of people that he or she can motivate and get to precincts, then you're stuck. You may have to do it yourself. I talk about a lady here who won twice because she had people hand out her own stuff at the polls. Kids, teenagers. I mean, you know, teenagers are great to use at the polls. College students. Who doesn't, you know, when they smile, I mean, my God, I mean, you know, you see a young person there with a sample ballot. I mean, you want to take it. And, you know, she had to do that because the party wasn't coming up with enough volunteers. So you may have to have your own poll workers help you raise money. I don't know if they're going to do that. I mean, in my experience, I got very little money from the party through the years. I had to do my own fundraising. I had to find my own campaign manager. I had to do my own phone bank. And even candidate recruitment, a lot of them are very bad. And I'm going to get a little bit to that later about what the Democrats are doing. Anne Marie and I were talking about that earlier. So anyway, your state or local party could have, and they do in Virginia, a nonprofit permit. And this saved me thousands of dollars on mailing. And I hope you will all be doing the postcards and direct mail. If you don't, I can't believe it actually worked on a state senate campaign in Norfolk area, okay? And I couldn't believe this candidate. The Republicans found a very good candidate, female business owner. She was a lobbyist for many years. And for some reason, she knew who I was, and she never bothered to call me whatsoever. Maybe I'm very, very scary or something. Maybe I need to smile more, take the glasses off. I don't know what it is. So she decided to listen to this 23-year-old and told her not to do any direct mail. Wow. I couldn't believe it. I mean, and she never went, her incumbent opponent, the Democrat, was weak. I mean, it was a district that was more Democratic. But still, I mean, she ended up with only 39% of the vote. But anyway, the direct mail permit is very helpful. It's just that you have to realize, and I don't know how it is in your individual races, that it will say paid for by the Republican Party of Virginia or the Democratic Party of whatever, and that will be there. But that indicia, the savings is pretty substantial, 13.5 cents versus 19 cents. You still get it red tag. Lists. Who here is not using a list? Who here is just going out the door just willy-nilly? No. You have to have a list. Now, how many here are in closed primary states where the state provides a list of people who voted in the Democratic and Republican primaries? Anybody here? Okay. That's a good list to use. That's only for people who vote in primaries. I mean, GOP Data Center, we hope, will have lists of people who we know are identified who voted for Trump or who voted Republican in the fall. When I did my book, I called Advantage because that's who the RNC uses. It's also I-360, and the Trump campaign is using a different vendor this year. I forget who it is.
Campaign Sidekick.
What?
Campaign Sidekick.
Right, Campaign Sidekick. I don't know where they get their data from, but the Trump campaign is using it. It's got to be good because they're now eons from where they were in 2016. I mean, it was a disastrous, disorganized campaign. I can talk to you about that later. It was really unbelievable. So, I was with Trump from the day he announced. So, lists, and they charge $100 a month. Now, for some of you guys running local, that's a lot of money, especially if you're going to have volunteers. I don't know if they charge extra for additional phones, but if you're willing to run, to basically do data work for an up-ballot contest, like a congressional candidate or Senate candidate, then, they'll create a list for you. And this lady in the front is nodding her head, so I guess I'm okay.
Yeah.
And so they will do a list for you. And you can go to the door and say, hi, I'm Ken Reid, I'm running for town council. You know, I hope I can get your vote, you engage the voter, and at the end, by the way, who are you voting for president? Or who are you voting for Senate? Who do you like in the Senate race? Because that's all they really want to know. There's some other questions you can ask too. So that's a very good advantage of being part of a party. Again, as I mentioned before, you know, personality alliances count. It's amazing how even candidates who are fantastic. Everybody get a magnet? No? Okay, well, that fellow there is supposed to hand them out, so if you can do that, that'd be great. You're key to winning elections. So if you can find some extra magnets for this crowd here, it'd be great. Again, I find that there are a lot of people who have a lot of lung power in these local units, and people will listen to what they say first. And getting to be on their good side and not avoiding them is very helpful. Again, you know, turn an enemy into a friend. You know, be personable. Don't be afraid to shake someone's hand, even though they may oppose you or they may be prickly or something like that. Watch out for what you post on social media, which our previous speaker talked about. Go to the functions, the fundraisers. You know, look people in the eyes, smile. It's very important. The nomination process. I'm going to get to this for a little bit because there are some people. That lady on the left there is Bill Sarandon's mother, Lee Tomlin. I don't know if she's still with us, but she has 8 kids. They're all liberals. And she was a hardcore conservative. And that was us at the 2009 state convention where Ken Cuccinelli beat out 2 other candidates to become the Attorney General nominee. And as you know, he was elected Attorney General. He very foolishly ran for governor 4 years later, lost, but I won't get into that now. He now works in the Trump administration and involved with Homeland Security. Do any of you have an opportunity to influence your nominating process, what it's going to be, what venue? You do? Anybody else, or is it already set at this point? It's already set. It's going to be a primary or a convention or a caucus, whatever. Well, then I'm going to have to skip through this because what I say in my book is that, in my view, the most important takeaway message here is that for candidates, conventions, caucuses, mass meetings are a lot better. You're dealing with a smaller voter pool. You don't have to spend a lot of money because you're running a campaign within a campaign. When you're dealing with a primary, even whether it's a firehouse, in other words, a party-run primary, or a closed primary, when you're going to have very few voters, you have very few voters, you're still dealing with thousands maybe, or hundreds. It's going to be a lot more. And if it's an open primary where the Democrats can vote the Republican primary, or the Republicans vote the Democratic primary, again, you're having to hit larger voters. You don't know who's going to show up. With a caucus or a convention, you basically are pinpointing specific people. As I say in the next slide, you know, so unless you have a lot of money to spend, if you have an opportunity to go for a party-run process, I would do that. But regardless, the most important thing is that the most conservative candidate will win. They just asked me to do a little video of leadership incident. They asked, what was your toughest loss? And my toughest loss was not one of mine. It was helping a candidate in 2007 try to win a firehouse primary for state senate, and he lost. And he put so much money and effort in, he did so much for the community, but he lost to a female candidate who was more conservative. And so this is what's happening in our political spectrum. And now these days with Democrats, it seems to be the socialist who's winning these contests. So you have to really focus on those conservative issues if you're dealing with a nominating process. You really have to. And it comes down to niche marketing, as I call it, and profiling. I know that has a very negative connotation, and I'm not advocating it for police purposes or anything else like that. But you have to come up with a certain kind of person who is going to show up and vote for you, whether it's primary, caucus, convention, whatever. Since you're all dealing with primaries, right? No one's here dealing with a caucus or a convention.
Colorado has caucus.
Excuse me?
Colorado has a caucus.
You have a caucus, okay. Well, it's the same thing that applies,
Yeah.
and I'm going to give you some examples. So you still need to micro-target, and you know, essentially people have to, the world goes to those who show up. Well, that's the way it is with primaries, conventions, and nominating contests, is that you get your people out to the polls no matter what. Even if you have to hire a bus, give them food, whatever, you gotta get them there, you gotta get them there at the right time so they can vote. Let me give you an example of how I failed in 2011. I'm not coming up here and saying how great I am. I'm also going to tell you where I failed. In fact, the book even talks, second half of the book is actually about serving in local office. It's a primer on local government. Anybody here running for city council, town council, state? Okay, you are. Okay, that'll be very helpful for you. I don't have much on school board. So anyway, we had a man named Scott York, and I'm putting his religion up there. You'll see why. Because he was a moderate, but he wanted to get back into the Republican Party, and he was having difficulty with the Democrat independent board that he had helped elect in 2007. He even endorsed Democrats. There was video of him doing that. So 7 of the 8 district supervisor candidates, including me, were recruiting delegates for him. There was one candidate who decided not to endorse. He was running against a guy named Steve Stockman, who again cast himself as the conservative. So what did I do? Ken Reid, I'm a conservative. That's who I know. I'm running around Leesburg going up to my conservative friends. Hey, you want to be a delegate? You want to be a delegate? Well, here's the problem, is that a lot of them were members of an evangelical church. So they were good to me. They liked me a lot. I guess they didn't like Mormons, or they didn't like the fact that he endorsed Democrats. So he won the nomination, but he was baffled that he lost the Leesburg district. And that stuck with him when we got elected, and I actually had some difficulties with him. I was not one of his favorites for other reasons as well, because I was kind of a maverick when I got elected, but you know, he was just baffled that I registered the second highest number of delegates, but they all flipped on him. And they all showed up, and I was like desperately trying to get people to vote the other way. It was impossible. People were, you know, slamming the door in my face. So what I should have done was, I mean, Mormons are Republican conservative voters. I could have made it a lot easier for myself if I just figured this out in my brain to set up a table outside the Mormon temple, or Mormon church, I'm sorry, chapel, and register voters that way in Leesburg. There are a lot of Mormons in Leesburg. So I didn't do that. He won the nomination. He was elected, of course. All 9 of us were elected in 2011. It was a Republican sweep. He run for the litter again. I had the fewest number. I had the narrowest margin. But then we come to 2015. There was a colleague of mine, Ralph Bono, who was running for re-election to the Ashburn district, and he had a guy who put his name in the race to run against him because he didn't like Ralph's position on ball fields. Okay, if you can imagine this, but Ralph was dismissive about ball fields. I forget what he did. It was a vote or something. So this guy's name was Joe Scalone, recruited soccer moms, soccer dads, you know, people who, you know, had a vested interest in ball fields. Bono, however, he recruited from Leisure World, which is a big retirement area, and other retirement communities. He had done a lot for those folks. Convention was held on a beautiful day in May 2015, and it easily could have been a primary. I mean, it easily could have been a primary, and the same thing would have happened. The soccer moms and dads are out with their kids. The convention rules say you got to be there by 10 o'clock to register, or you cannot vote. And so there I was, a volunteer, registering people to come in as delegates. They were all over 60, 65, one after the other. He basically got the nomination, no problem, because he basically profiled. He figured out that these people were going to show up and they were going to sit there. So anyway, as I want to just, you know, drill this into your brain. The most important thing about running for office, we good on time, or am I going over?
You are just fine.
Good. 6 M's: messaging, management, manpower, which means woman power too, but that's the word, manpower. Money, marketing, also media, and momentum. And every candidate has to have that. You have to start out with a good message, because donors as well as voters do not spend a lot of time, and you have to have a quick elevator pitch and so forth. Opposition research, SWOT analysis. I love the fact that on your agenda next is the Leesburg Grid. I actually mentioned that. What? That's tomorrow?
That was before.
Oh, it was before. Did he talk about the Leesburg Grid?
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, I mentioned that in my book. It's like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And every candidate should do that. And they should be very, very objective about what their weaknesses are and so forth. Important. You have to be able to manage the money, do this or that, manpower, about volunteers. Money is the mother's milk of politics, according to a Democratic boss in California many years ago, Jesse Unruh, I don't know if anybody remembers him. Marketing is very important. You gotta have, now newspapers, I find, and general media is not as important in a primary contest. So if you're dealing with a primary contest, I don't know if I would want to spend any money there, unless it's maybe a Republican target or conservatives targeted media. And then finally, momentum. Party endorsements we're not going to go through. I'm going to save you some time because it's in the handouts, because nobody here is seeking what we can learn from the Democrats. The Democratic Party, when I first got involved in politics in the 70s, the Democratic and Republican parties are so different today. But the Democrats, I have to give credit to Bob McDonnell, former governor of Virginia, who made these comments at a Republican advance. It's kind of a retreat that we had. Essentially what he said that I thought was very interesting is that the Democrats welcome everybody in. We want you, even if you're not legal. You can run, you can vote. We want you in here. We're going to do what we can. They seem to have no standards whatsoever. We, on the other hand, we always are looking for who's a good conservative or who's a rhino. So we are more exclusive. We love facts, not feelings, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's intolerance on both sides, to be honest with you. I find that the liberals are not very tolerant of people of faith, like myself, or including people like myself, and of course conservatives, people who support Trump. Have any of you heard of the National Democratic Training Committee? A couple of you have. Well, they have great videos, and I registered, and I didn't put down I was a member of any party, and I have access to their videos. And they're good, and they're doing training programs, they're recruiting candidates. They essentially have taken the idea from Republicans in like 2009, 2010 time frame. We had the Republican State Leadership Committee, and they essentially recruited and supported candidates for state senate and House of Delegates throughout the country in order to influence redistricting. And now the Democrats are doing that, and they did it in Virginia very successfully. And they're doing a lot of hand-holding of candidates. We, on the other hand, if you don't go to the Leadership Institute, I don't know where you would go for training. I just don't know. Some of your local parties may have somebody come in and talk and everything like that. But they are now reaching into the down ballot areas. I just clipped an article about Act Blue. Anybody hear about Act Blue? Yeah. Very interesting how they're able to channel donations to candidates who need it. I think they raised over $1 billion in donations over the last 10 years. Republicans have competing groups that do this apparently. But these are good videos. You might learn something, and they talk about fundraising, and they give you some good ideas. It's kind of high level. It's not really very specific because they don't want to take work away from consultants. Who wants to do that, right? I'm not a consultant, so I can say that. And just to give you an example, just because this kind of distresses me, because I had a number of friends, personal friends who I worked with, Republicans, who never did anything for Trump, but yet they were associated with him because they were Republican and they lost their races primarily on that. That was one guy there at the bottom. His Democrat opponent got $4 million to beat him. It was an open seat to $1 million. We have a higher turnout in Virginia. I don't know if you've seen this in your states, but we now have a Commonwealth's attorney in Loudoun County who essentially took $800,000 from George Soros and essentially has pledged to relax enforcement of crime. She never prosecuted a case in her life. Career person who was a Republican candidate, but she might as well be a civil servant. Lost to her. It was narrow. We had 2 women elected to the Board of Supervisors who had no involvement at all with their communities over more experienced people who had legislative accomplishments, people who were actually in office. One was like this because she flipped off Trump. I don't know if you heard about her. She flipped him off and was fired for it, and she got photographed, so she beat somebody who was a 2-term incumbent who had done a lot for the district and for the county. So that's what we're faced with, so I really hope that all of you guys will win. Conservatism is important. I use the term that we are the counterweight to statism and tyranny. Anybody read Mark Levin's Liberty and Tyranny? Okay, good. I love Mark. Love the guy. Can't pay. He lives in Loudoun County, so I can photograph him. He's actually attacked me on the air twice. I can talk to you about that later, but I still love the guy. I love the guy. I just love him. And, without conservatives on the local level, we're going to have bills we're going to have legislation to ban plastic straws and allow the homeless on the street, and our communities are going to be forced for it. Because a lot of the Democrats are not screening people. They're going around to central casting and trying to find, well, we need a lesbian or bisexual candidate here. We need a black candidate here. We need a Hispanic candidate. It's all based on appearance, is what it is. It's based on identity politics. So I hope that you will, seriously follow what you're getting here at this institute. Because if you do it, as Dana last said, at full strength ballot, you should win at the ballot. And I really want to thank you very much, and now I'm prepared to take questions. Yes?
You were speaking about training. Have you heard of the Emerge program in the Democrat Party?
No, what is that?
Well, I'm in New Mexico, and it's focused upon women, and they spend a lot of money on them, a lot of time, and groom them exclusively for local office.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah, Run for Something, I mentioned that before. That was a book that was put out to encourage people who were in the pink hat crowd. We laughed at these people, but a lot of these pink-hatted people who did the anti-Trump demonstrations were elected. They're now in power, and they're in Virginia. They are putting forth a lot of very bad legislation. And just given the demographics of Virginia, I don't know if we're going to be able to counter it, but the Republican Party has to start doing more hand-holding and helping of its candidates, and it's not. We seem to have a laissez-faire attitude, which is, laissez-faire is good, but if you don't get elected to office, then you're not at the table. I'd rather be at the table than fighting battles on Facebook with people, so I can claim I'm right. Yes, ma'am.
Pursuant to your point, do you recommend attending Democratic or liberal institutions or training such as the Emerge program if the Republican Party?
I don't know if they'll. I suppose you could. I mean, I don't know anything about, how good they are or whatever. And you have to understand, if you're running in the Republican primary, you have a primary contest. You're dealing with a different kind of voter pool. So, I don't know what they're teaching folks in these classes. I really can't. I just know what I've written. It's worked for me, and I was elected in a blue district.
They're teaching community organizing, and I'm serious. I've been to a couple of those, and I actually teach a class on local government as well. It's all about organizing, and if they are so far ahead of us in organizing and getting out the vote. That's where their strength comes from, and we don't teach that.
No, I actually did some research for my book, and I went on I found the Democratic Training Committee, and I looked on the RNC website. It says training to be announced, and nothing's been announced yet. I know in Wisconsin and Oklahoma they have the training sessions coming right up, and they're for local candidates and so forth. But they give them money. They give them, the Republicans in Virginia this year, they identified a lot of excellent female candidates. They really did, and they set them up with a campaign manager, and but they only went so far. They only went so far. The Democrats were pouring money and manpower because they wanted to influence the redistricting, and they will probably do that. We'll see what happens. So, yes?
Given a local party apparatus is completely overtaken by factionalism in some areas, would you ever recommend letting things kind of withdraw and cooling off at the risk of losing ground in against Democrats, just in case you don't want to get involved, is there ever a case to be made for a selfish action like that?
Are you a candidate?
No, I was just curious.
But if you're a candidate, so you're not running for anything?
No.
Okay, well, but if you're a candidate, I wouldn't get involved with it.
Right.
I just wouldn't. So I'm thinking of candidates. I mean, you know, candidates and electeds have to just sit back, and if the party activists are going to fight amongst themselves over whatever ridiculous issue it is, or picayune issue is a better word, I don't want to say ridiculous, but you know, they will spend a lot of time. So what is your question? Is it
Well, I'm just, in a case where any contribution you made to a party apparatus be viewed as one side or the other, is there ever a case to be made for just withdrawing from the party, not the party, but from the apparatus for a moment in time?
Well, you basically withdraw yourself from the discussion and
Right.
the debate and the controversy. You know, I've had to do that several times. I had to sit there. I mean, you know, I hadn't put this slide up, but between 2001 and 2007, do you know what the most overriding issue of concern was to the activists in the Loudoun County Republican Committee? I'll give you a hint. Mannery said it's the most fastest growing county in the country. So what do you think that was? What? Growth. Growth. In 1999, a bunch of anti-growth Democrats were elected. They wanted to downzone, take away people's vested rights. All of a sudden, all these property owners joined the Republican committee. They took over. And I remember when I was running for office in 2006, I had to sit there and listen to a proposal to expel 6 or 7 Republicans from the committee because they were not supportive, because they supported the downzoning. I mean, you know, they supported Scott York, the independent. I mean, that's what they were debating about. And then once that issue went away, the property rights people went away. And then you had people coming in who were concerned about guns or the metro extension. Tomorrow, Steve Klaus is going to be lecturing. Please mention my name to him. Steve was one of my professors here, if you will, and I learned a lot. I mentioned how you look on TV in the book. I used a lot in the book. He became one of my supporters, but he liked the fact that I voted for the metro extension to Dulles Airport. A lot of Republicans did, but in the party, oh my God, they wanted my neck. They wanted me on a chopping block because I was the 5th vote to bring metro out to Dulles Airport, which is not going to get out until next year. So, you know, but what I would do is, instead of like backing off from these people, I engage with them. Again, you know, be a leader, make an enemy into a friend. So the guy who was like calling my rabbi, my wife, and everybody to get me not to change my vote, he ended up beating an establishment Republican for the General Assembly in 2013, who I supported. And what did I do? Did I avoid this guy? No, I went around and I campaigned with him. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to support the nominee, and he appreciated that a lot. I didn't back off from him, I worked with him. So that's what you got to do as a candidate, because when you get into office, you're going to be dealing with people who are going to hate you. They just are. So you want them to hate you less? No? I think. Yes.
So I sometimes go to town halls of Democrats. And I do this because I push back on some of the things that they're doing, the kinds of things.
Right.
And I also try to get some kind of knowledge of what they're doing. Is this something that you think I should be doing, or do you think I should be staying on my side of it?
What are you running for?
Nothing right now.
Whatever you're running for, focus on winning that election. That's what you got to focus on. Don't get involved. Don't get sidetracked. I mean, going to a Democratic town hall, I guess, to get information or whatever, fine. But, you know, figure out what the best use of your time is as a candidate. I'm talking about candidates here. That's who I'm talking to. Or even campaign managers. Winning, winning, winning. What does Trump always say? You're going to get tired of winning. We're going to win so much. Well, we got to see more winning on the Republican level. I'm sorry. I know this is not partisan here, but that's what we got to do. We got to get conservatives in office to stop this nonsense that's happening on the local level. Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a comment and ask you to comment on my comment rather than just ask a direct question, if that's okay.
Please.
I'm running for Congress in the Detroit area against Rashida Tlaib, but ultimately if I win the Republican primary. But the thing is, One of the reasons I'm doing this, I'm absolutely fed up with the pro-life movement and the Republican Party. They insist upon fighting the battle on our opponents' terms and turf. That's a strategy for defeat, and I'm not interested in that. They keep describing our opponents as secular. That's an outrageous lie that they have perpetrated for centuries. They are actually the world's worst, most dangerous religious fanatics. They worship themselves, their own intellects and powers of reason, and expect the rest of us to do the same. That's my position, okay? And we see it constantly. We see it in their idea that they can determine who does and doesn't matter as a person. We can see them belittle the Constitution as a living document that they can interpret any way they see fit. We see it in lots of other ways. So what I'm saying is we need to point out that they are the religious fanatics, not us.
Why would you want to do that?
Why would I want to do that? They're making great gains.
Well, why would you? Don't you want to win your nomination?
Yeah, my handlers are telling me not to do it.
You're
right.
what?
My handlers, my staff, my campaign people.
They're right.
I know that. I know. But when do we get to turn around and tell people the truth?
You know, I wrote an article online, and I write for a blog, and it was the 30th anniversary of Roe v. Wade a couple of years ago. And I wrote this article where I basically said the pro-life movement is one of the most unsuccessful of the conservative movements in the country. They are. They're unsuccessful. They can gather thousands of people to Washington every year. They can gather people to protest. But they have been unsuccessful at legislation. And whenever they've tried to do things like ultrasound legislation, it's backfired on us. Abortion is now, I write about the pharmaceutical industry for a living. That's one, I have a business. And we're now gone from 1.5 million abortions to about 700,000, because the rest of them, if there are the rest of them, are through what you know as RU 486. They're non-surgical. If the Supreme Court should overrule Roe versus Wade and then throw it back into the legislatures.
I don't believe that's the case either.
Well, but anyway, but the fact is that, you know, your message should be, I don't know, are you pro-life?
Yeah.
You are.
I go back before Roe v. Wade.
Fine, you're pro-life, but the fact is that the most important thing is to get rid of the socialist Rashida Tlaib. And if I were you, I'd be finding as many Orthodox Jews as possible who will give you thousands of dollars.
I'll be attending an AIPAC meeting Thursday night.
I'll tell you this right now, man. Really, Alfred is your name?
Yeah.
We can't stand her. We cannot stand her. We cannot stand Ilhan Omar. And we find Orthodox Jews and evangelicals to contribute to your campaign and say, I've got to get rid of the anti-Zionist. You do that, and you might be the Republican nominee in your district. Get off the abortion issue, because unfortunately the Republican Party, a lot of people support, they're pro-life, and I'm pro-life too. But, you know, the movement has not been successful. It has not been successful. I don't know of any state that bans it. Any state ban it? No, it's happened. It happens. Abortion happens. So anyway, that's my give on it. Any other questions? Please. Yes.
What do we need to do to get the more evangelical movement involved in politics? I pastored about 35 years, and I know they're involved in some level of it, but it seems like a lot of them are afraid to deal with a lot of the issues that are out here, because it does affect the church growth and their finances. So many times pastors and community just don't want to jump in head on some of these issues. And so they sort of avoid politics. It's sort of like we want to do church, but we don't want to do politics.
Well, yeah.
Politics are social issues. They are for the Jews and the Christians, because you're dealing with LGBT issues, abortion, many things that I think have created. What do you think? What's your take on it?
Where I come from, evangelicals are voters, and they get involved. Where are you from, sir?
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Well, they don't want to deal with the issues. They don't want to talk about things that I think are prudent to candidates. And we see a lot of them now getting very soft on these issues.
Well, the Christian Coalition was very helpful when Bush was president, George W. Bush. He was. I think we probably need to replicate that. But you know, the thing that everybody should be concerned about is just the creeping statism and transferism, as they call it. It's you know, socialism is a good buzzword. I mean, the thing that I fear the most, if you want to know the truth, it's not the Green New Deal. It's not Medicare for all. It's not some of the other proposals, because they have no chance of getting passed. Because the lobbyists are going to kill them. I mean, I've lived here in Washington, D.C. here since '86, and the lobbyists are going to kill those programs. They're going to water them down in such a way to make them ineffective. What I'm concerned about is when you hear candidates say, we need to take away the tax exemptions of churches, and they usually say churches that preach hate, meaning against homosexuality. Guess what, my friend? Guess who else preaches against homosexuality? My synagogue. Every Yom Kippur, we read a whole section in Deuteronomy, there's Leviticus, all the sexual prohibitions. What do we learn? Homosexuality is an abomination. Okay. But that's it. We do it one day out of the year, and we're done. We don't spend a lot of time on that. In the homes, in the people's homes, Orthodox community I live in, yeah, we're definitely, you marry a woman. Joshua, Rivka, you're going to marry a man, and that's it. Okay, so that's what we teach. But they're talking about getting rid of the tax exemption. Maybe that's something that people should be concerned about. Is that to me is a real threat, and that's something that should get evangelical voters interested. But are you running on the local level?
It's State House.
State House. Okay, so are they talking about getting rid of that, getting into the church?
They are.
They are. Okay.
They are.
There you go. That should be something to get people interested.
Just a quick comment on that. Talk to Tony Perkins. His group has trained 10,000 pastors in the last 2 years about how to talk about politics to their congregations.
You don't see it a lot in South Carolina.
You know?
No.
Really?
Not.
Well,
Ask them to stop by. Anyway, I can put you in touch.
I'd
They're
like to see
amazing.
that. I'd like to
10,000
see
pastors. It's a lot.
Yeah. It's a problem
They
in
have a
South
really good
Carolina.
training program for pastors.
Well, a lot of it's driven, a lot of times church issues are driven on growth and money, and they don't want to divide that congregation up as Republicans or
right.
Democrats, so they slide these issues. And of course, you can see a lot of prominent leaders today have backed off on these really conservative ideas and sort of water it down because they don't want to get tagged in a particular way that they might lose voters or they might lose members of their congregation.
Well, I won my election in part because of the evangelical minister. I called him up during the camp. He was helping this other guy recruit delegates who ran against Scott York, and I called him up and I said, I've been with you all the way, your new church, I voted for you, but, I'm having a real hard time. I'm calling up, your members have been registered as delegates, and he goes, well, Stockman helped our congregation. I didn't know this was happening. So then he decided as a sop, if you will, to have a debate. So he had a candidates debate, and he invited the Leesburg candidates, different candidates for different office. So I'm there before 400 voters, and I can basically say, I'm pro-life, and I appreciate you have a Hanukkah menorah here, everybody, and they did, because they're very much, almost Christian Zionists, evangelicals are, very tight relationship with Israel, as you know. Well, what happened was, a couple weeks later, I was watching TV, and my opponent voted against the church's issues. It's a very complicated issue, but there was an item before the Board of Supervisors, and she voted against it. She didn't understand it or something. So I emailed the town attorney, and I said, I emailed the pastor, wasn't this legislation you guys wanted? And so what he did was right before that Sunday, I didn't know because I wasn't there. I don't go to church there. I was told, did you hear what the pastor said? I said, no. He goes, well, he basically told everybody that Kelly Burke, who was my opponent, voted against the church's wishes on a land use issue, and then said at the very end, all I can tell you, folks, is there's an election Tuesday. Well, do you think that they voted for her, or do they vote for the Jew guy here? Voted for the Jew. So he helped me out. He helped me out just by saying that one thing. He didn't say who to vote for, but he said our supervisor voted against that bill. It was an election Tuesday. For her. Good. I got copies for $20. They're cheaper than online.
Great.
You want to go to the other room, or?
Yeah, you can bring them in here if you want.
Bring them in here?
That works. Okay, guys. I think I turned this off. So we have about a half hour until our next speaker. It is George Landreth. He is really super great. Those of you who joined us for the campaign management school have seen it before. This is a new speech, though not the same one as last time. Just wanted to clarify. So yeah, feel free to talk with Ken.